Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Software Architecture White Robes community update for the month of February 2024. So the SOAR team is an internal team here at SSW, and we're responsible for maintaining some of our templates, like the Clean Architecture template. We also put out reference architectures for examples of different architectures, and we also put out other guidance in the forms of rules and training as well. So in this update, we're going to go through some of the updates from the team, what we've been up to in the last month or so. So team introductions. On the call today, we have myself, Daniel Mackay. So I'm a solution architect here at SSW, and we also have William Liebenberg, another solution architect. We have Matt Goldman, a solution architect also. Matt Wicks, another solution architect. Luke Parker, software engineer level 2. And we also have Adam Kogan, chief architect, aka the boss. So let's get into it. Okay, the agenda today, we've got 3 sections that we're going to go through. So the first is some new rules and guidance that we've written around architecture and some around some of the new C# features as well. We've also got some announcements and new features that we've put into our Clean Architecture template. And at the end, we're going to cover some events before we wrap up. Okay, so the team has been pretty busy writing a whole bunch of new rules. So I'll just jump over to my browser here, and then we can have a quick skim through some of these. So the first rule that we've got here is around, do you know how to use code migrations? So this is a rule that we've had for a little while. And this rule talks about how to use entity first for code first migrations. So we've kind of updated, we've given this a bit of a refresh, this rule, a bit of a refresh, sorry. And we've added in some examples on how to create migrations with Rider. So one of the problems with creating EF migrations is that if you're doing it via the command line, it can be not always trivial to put in the right commands and get the commands and flags exactly right, especially if you've got multiple projects that you need to deal with. So this UI comes out of the box now in Rider and makes it really, really easy to create your migrations first time. And what we're really sort of narrowing in on this rule here is the migration bundles. So, what we see sort of quite commonly in projects is migrations just being run during startup, as you can see in this code here. So that's not really a best practice. It can make your apps a lot slower to start up. And what the better approach is to do here is to use migrations instead. So what you can do is you can build a migration bundle during your CI/CD pipeline, and that can be executed just once on deployment. And once the database schema has been updated, that's not something that you need to worry about until the next deployment. So that's a much better way to handle your migrations. All right, so let's move on to our next rule. So this one is about co-authoring commits. So at SSW, we like to work in pairs as much as possible. And if you're doing something like pair programming, it's often a good idea or polite to add, contribution to whoever you worked on a code change with. So you can do that by co-authoring your commits. And when done correctly, it'll come up in GitHub, as you can see in this screenshot here. And you can see that this particular commit was co-authored by myself and also my colleague Brady here. So how do we make that happen? There's a few different ways. If you are using live share, this will just happen automatically. There's some VS Code extensions. If you're using Rider, there is a little bit of tooling and some autocomplete that'll help you populate your commit to have the author come up here. GitHub Desktop, this makes it really easy to add co-authors as well. And if you're really hardcore, you can also do this via the command line, but good luck not making a typo. All right, so the next rule that we added was one about mass transit. So mass transit is a pretty cool messaging library, and it's been around for a little while. There are some other similar ones such as NService Bus and Rebus, but the advantage that mass transit provides is that it gives you an abstraction across all of the different types, or a lot of the different types of messaging technologies. So you can build out your application, your messaging, and you can target mass transit and code against that API or that SDK. And then it's just a little bit of configuration to get it to use something like Azure Service Bus or RabbitMQ or Amazon, if that's the stack that you're on, or you can even run it in memory as well, which is great for local development. So it's just a nice level, a nice bit of abstraction that gives you some flexibility to change later on down the track. There's a few other advantages of using mass transit. Supports all these transports, as I mentioned. But another good advantage is that it supports complex messaging patterns such as sagas, which is pretty cool. Right, so for our next rule is about collection expressions. So William, I'll hand over to you for this one.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. So C# is becoming more and more functional, and this is one very nice example of that as well. So we can see there in the bad example, you still have the new upper list of integers, and then give that in your notation there. Now, we also don't need to really use the type name anymore because it can be inferred for us. And it's just using var. Yeah, but we still have the new keyword. Now in C# 11, we have an even better version. So we can still say that we have a list of integers and give it literally just an expression of an array 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is it. That's a collection expression. Now, what happens in that example here? So we've got a foo, foo2, and foo3 set of methods. And each of those have different signatures. So we've got an IEnumerable of int, a list of int, and an int array. And you can see from the usages there, Daniel, if you can highlight the code for me there, yeah, the inputs into all three of these methods is the same. So the first 3 lines, we show there that we've got a collection expression of an array or a collection of 1, 2, and 3 that works for all those different signatures. So under the covers, the compiler really works out the best type to pass to our method, which is very, very nice. So it's a nice and functional, easy way. We write less code, and this also works with older code that you've brought into C# 11 or .NET 8, which is quite nice. Just less code, and it works as you expect.
Awesome. Thank you, William. And the
Can I
next
ask
rule,
a question before we move
yeah,
on?
go for it, Adam.
Okay. I know your team looks at lots of different bits and pieces, and some things you discount because it doesn't come under your purview. Why does this come under software architecture when it's just nicer syntax?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, look, this is not specifically under software architecture, but I just think it's a nice little feature to call out. It's something that I use a lot, and I think as architects, we're writing a lot of code as well. So you're right, it's not specific to architecture, but I think it's just a nice little language feature to be aware of when you're writing the code.
Okay, Goldie?
I think that while this specific example isn't specifically directly related to architecture, it is reflective of a bit of a paradigm change, which is what William mentioned at the start when he started talking about this, which is C# is becoming more functional. And this is just one example. Now, this is laser focused on this one thing, but as we move forward and as we look at more of the functional changes coming into C#, that is going to influence how we write code at an architectural level.
Thank you. That compiles in my head. Beautiful.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks for the question, Adam. Right. The next rule that we're going to talk about here is string literals. Again, this is a coding kind of rule and not specific to architecture. But Luke, do you want to take us through this one?
Sure. So as you might know with strings previously, if you try and do a backslash, doesn't work as it's going to interpret it as potentially a new line with that next character. So we had verbatim strings for a long time now, which is great for file paths. But in case you missed it, we have raw string literals, which are a even nicer way to do multi-line strings. So previously you might try and plus lots of strings together to do things like generating source code or HTML. But with a raw string literal, the white space is trimmed before the end quotes. So in this bottom case, the good example, we actually end up with a non-indented multi-line string that can be in line with all of your code in the same indentation level, but you still get that nice string. So it's just a nice way to clean up code.
That's right. And I think this comes in quite handy that if you are doing something like writing SQL directly in your applications, this can be maybe you've got some really complex SQL that you can't have a equivalent link expression for, right? You can use this kind of syntax here just to make that SQL that you have to write a lot easier to understand without having to jump through all of these sort of hoops here with all this extra noise. So I think that's pretty cool. Awesome. All right, so let's jump back to the slides here.
Only thing that wasn't called out is this, it doesn't prevent you from using string interpolation. You can still use string interpolation with raw string literals.
That's right,
Yep.
correct.
The other kind of hidden upside is you can actually do more than 3 quotes if you want to have quotes in your text. So say you have some custom language that uses 4 quotes, you wrap it in 5 quotes, and then, you know, any number below that is just interpreted verbatim.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that, guys. All right, so let's carry on here. So next we're going to move on to the next section around clean architecture template and some of the changes that we've made recently. So one of note is around the time provider, which is a new API available in .NET 8. So previously in our template, we used to have an iDateTime interface, and this was an abstraction over the system clock. And this was really helpful for unit tests so that we could set the time to a specific time, you know, if we were writing code that was dependent on specific times. So now the .NET team has actually provided an implementation or a class, sorry, that basically does this as well, and it's called the time provider. So this is something that's brand new in .NET 8. And the advantage of this one is it allows us to both fast forward and rewind through time, so some sort of magical time travel, if you will. It works with both system clocks like our previous abstraction, but the extra thing that this does on top of that is it also works with timers. So that's another nice thing. And it's also task aware. So if you're doing some sort of like task delay or anything like that, you can feed in this time provider and all of your code will it'll just be a lot easier to test under the hood. And that's really probably another thing to call out is one of the main advantages or reasons for adding this time provider is all about unit testing, right? So it just makes that a lot easier. Cool. So
I know that John Skeet always seemed to answer all the date time questions on Stack Overflow. Out of curiosity, is this related, and has he talked about this at all?
I'm not so sure about that. Does anyone else have any idea?
Yeah, John Skeet was behind Notatime, which is a different implementation in .NET because the .NET date time setup wasn't amazing in terms of dealing with time zones and whatnot. So this has actually come out of inspecting what does Microsoft do internally. They had a whole bunch of different implementations of like an iDateTime service, and they've just baked it into the framework now to standardize the approach as opposed to the date time implementations. So it's purely testing.
Okay, I brought that up only because he's like the number one guy on Stack Overflow. This was the most common topic he talked about, so it was a massive pain. Like huge number of .NET devs, time date issues.
Yep. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next change. Matt, do you want to take us through this one?
Yeah, so we had a look in terms of how we're generating our OpenAPI spec. Because if you look at the Microsoft examples, they use Swashbuckle. We were using NSwag. We did a bit of a review, and it's a bit unfortunate because what's happened is the maintainer of Swashbuckle has been kind of burnt by the open source community and doesn't have enough time to contribute to the project. We're not sure if anyone else is going to pick it up or if Microsoft is going to pick it up. But thankfully there's NSwag is out there, and that's being actively maintained. So we've taken that, we've updated to the non-preview packages now that they've been released. And if you just move forward, we had nswag.ms build in the project before. We weren't actually making much use of it because we weren't generating any client-side code. And the only other advantage was we'd be able to serve the OpenAPI spec as a static file. We're now doing that through middleware because it's not something that's regularly accessed. So we removed that. That's improved build times, which is pretty cool because that can usually take a couple of seconds for a larger project. We've got an ADR doc, which, there's a link there if you want to go check out what's happened with that.
Awesome.
When you say improve build times, you improve build times by 2 seconds. Is that it?
Well, so I'm on a project at the moment, and we use MS Build to generate the static OpenAPI spec, and that's happening on every build, and that's adding 4 or 5 seconds to every build. So I run .NET Watch. If I make a code change, it has to run this external process again and again. So it's a paper cut, but it happens. It's not something that we need every build as well. So having middleware serve it up is, it's good enough. If this was a production instance, I'd put Azure API management in front of it, and that would serve the OpenAPI spec for me. I don't need to statically render it. Goldie,
you got a question?
No.
Not a question, just an observation. So for me, the increase in build time performance is really a side benefit of removing the NSwag MS build task. Like, that's awesome. But what I've always struggled with is that the NSwag MS build task tends to mask other errors in your build. And it's not so much that it makes the build times take longer, it makes debugging take longer.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I've had the same thing when you're trying to build something and the MS build fails to build, and you think it's something wrong with that, but no, it's some other compilation error. But you're right, it's always buried deep within the MS build output. Yeah, that's spot on.
So for me, the compounding issue here is if we look at microservice projects. If we do that the NSwag.ms build for each one of those projects, that 4 or 5 seconds on even some of the smaller APIs, the effect gets compounded. It adds up. So I take that out of there, and it speeds things up quite a lot. I guess the other issue with some of the NSwag stuff is that NSwag Studio is Windows only. And so we want to leave the sort of client generation stuff up to the consumer. So we provide the Swagger or the OpenAPI file, and anyone who wants to generate a client off that can. So they can just consume our file. We don't really need to generate the spec and the client from our template anymore. So that's why we sort of moved away from that. And so a bunch of undocumented features and things that get deprecated. It's quite hard to track for us on NSwag as well, but it's still a great project. We're just using just the right bit for us now.
That's right. Awesome. Thanks, William. Let's move on to the next one. So this is probably the biggest announcement, the biggest piece of news that we've got today. This is something that we've been working on for, I think, around close on a year now, from most of the team that's on this call today, plus a few others that couldn't be here. So I think that's a really big effort from all of the team to get to a stage that we're happy enough to kind of put it out in the public for other people to use. So there's a lot of changes that's gone into this specific release, leveraging some of the new .NET 8 features such as primary constructors, refactoring the datetime service, as I mentioned before. A few other things here, the exception filters. So this is a new thing in .NET 8 that we're also leveraging. And I think some of the changes towards the bottom here were just around putting some policies and standards in place just to make it clear around contributing guidelines, etc. So I think that's pretty cool. So if you would like to find out more about our clean architecture template or contribute or raise feedback in any way, we're sort of welcome to hear from you. So you can go to our GitHub repository here, create a discussion or an issue, and we'd love to hear what you think.
Cool. All right. Coming up this year, we've got a few exciting events. So we've got 1 and 2 day workshops with Angular. So Angular, our trainer there is Matt Wicks. He's on this call alongside a few other solution architects not on the call. And then Daniel and myself will be running the clean architecture 1 day and 2 day workshop later on in the year.
That's right. Yeah, I think we had a lot of fun running the workshops last year. So really looking forward to running them again this year. Should be cool. All right, so that brings us to the end of the community update today. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everybody.